My sister Madison called me at 7 a.m. on her wedding day, and I could hear that familiar tone creeping into her voice, the one she'd perfected over 35 years of being the golden child. "Riley, I hope you're getting ready okay," she said. Though we both knew this wasn't really about my morning routine. "I wanted to talk before today gets hectic because honestly, I'm a little worried about you." I was standing in my Greenwich apartment, coffee growing cold in my hand as the Connecticut sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. In 9 hours, Madison would be walking down the aisle at Grandview Estate, the oceanfront venue that had consumed 3 years of my life, transforming a crumbling 1920s mansion into what wedding magazines now called the most exclusive destination in the state. The thing is, Madison continued, her voice taking on that gentle, almost therapeutic quality she used when she thought she was being particularly wise. "Today is going to be overwhelming. You'll be around the Blackwoods and they're just so accomplished, so connected to important people. Ethan's family moves in circles where everyone has built something significant, where success is just expected." She paused, and I could picture her sitting in her bridal suite at the Blackwood estate, probably getting her makeup done while delivering what she thought was sisterly wisdom. "I don't want you to feel bad about yourself, Riley. Not everyone gets to build empires or change the world. Some people find meaning in smaller ways, and that's beautiful too." "That's enough." I traced my finger along the window glass, watching delivery trucks navigate the winding Greenwich roads that would soon be filled with wedding guests heading to celebrate at my venue. What Madison didn't know was that her family's biggest disappointment owned the very estate where she'd pledged her love, had personally designed every detail from the marble ballroom to the oceanfront terrace, and had anonymously covered every single penny of her $250,000 dream wedding. Her words should have slid off me after decades of hearing them, but they still stung. Maybe because every version of this conversation carried the weight of all the ones before it. To understand why, you'd have to know what it meant to grow up as Madison Harper's younger sister. They say comparison is the thief of joy, but in the Harper family, comparison was practically an Olympic sport. My name is Riley Harper, and for 35 years, I've been the silver medal to my sister Madison's gold. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, Madison and I were like two sides of a coin that never quite matched. She was 3 years older, which in Harper family mathematics translated to 3 years wiser, 3 years more accomplished, and 3 years closer to perfection. Madison was valedictorian at Greenwich Academy Harvard MBA, corner office by 28. I was the kid who built fairy houses in the backyard and insisted we could communicate with our golden retriever through interpretive dance. Our parents, Stephen and Diane Harper, weren't intentionally cruel about the comparisons. Dad was a retired engineer who approached parenting like a project with measurable outcomes. Mom had been a high school teacher for 30 years, and she had that instinct for recognizing potential and pointing out where it wasn't being met. I remember my high school graduation like it was yesterday. Madison had graduated summa cum laude 3 years earlier, and her party filled our entire backyard with family, friends, teachers, and neighbors. When my turn came, the gathering was smaller, the conversations shorter, and I caught Dad explaining to Uncle Warren that I was still finding my direction while Madison was already excelling at Harvard. That pattern continued through our 20s. Every family dinner felt like a performance review where only one of us was meeting expectations. The invisibility lived in small moments. Family photos where Madison naturally stood in the center while I found myself at the edges. Dinner conversations that revolved around her latest promotion, her newest apartment, her impressive salary increases. When relatives asked about my career, the questions felt more like welfare checks. "How are you doing, sweetie? Are you still figuring things out? Don't worry. Everyone blooms at their own pace." Madison never seemed to notice the imbalance. She was brilliant driven, and everything our parents had hoped for in a daughter. I was creative, intuitive, and apparently still a work in progress at 35. But here's what my family didn't know. 3 years ago, I met David Kim at a construction site in Westchester County. He was the architect overseeing a renovation project I was secretly funding, and I was pretending to be the project manager to avoid complicated questions. David had this way of looking at spaces and seeing possibilities that others missed. We started texting about building codes and design elements, but soon our conversations wandered into everything else. David didn't know my family, which meant he saw me without the filter of comparison. To him, I wasn't the sister who couldn't quite measure up. I was just Riley, a woman with ambitious plans and the determination to see them through. We had been together for over a year now, but I kept him separate from my family life. Not because I was ashamed of him, but because I was protecting something precious from the inevitable judgments. My phone buzzed with a text from David as I stood in my apartment kitchen, holding Madison's wedding invitation. The heavy cardstock felt expensive between my fingers, cream-colored with an elegant script announcing her engagement to Ethan Blackwood. Even her choice in fiancé felt like an achievement. Ethan was an investment banker from one of those Connecticut families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. "How did the family dinner go last night?" David's text read. "About as expected," I typed back. "Madison is marrying investment banker royalty. The family is thrilled." "And how are you feeling about it?" I stared at his message. Honestly, I was happy for Madison. She deserved love and partnership and all the beautiful things that came with finding the right person. But I also knew that this wedding would become another measuring stick. Another opportunity for our family to celebrate Madison's excellent choices, while politely wondering when I might make some of my own. "I'm happy for her," I replied, but also dreading being the spinster sister at the wedding of the century. "You're not a spinster. You're a woman who hasn't settled for less than she deserves." David had a way of reframing things that made me feel less like a family disappointment and more like someone writing her own story. It was one of the things I loved most about him, and one of the reasons I wasn't ready to introduce him to the Harper family circus just yet. The wedding invitation included an inner envelope asking if I would be bringing a guest. I knew I could bring David, introduce him as my boyfriend, and watch my family's surprise that I had somehow managed to attract a successful, attractive man. But that felt like using him as a prop in a drama that had nothing to do with our relationship. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and looked at myself in the reflection of my microwave door. 35 years old, financially independent, professionally successful in ways my family couldn't imagine, and still questioning whether I should attend my own sister's wedding because I was tired of feeling inadequate. The truth was, Madison's engagement was just the beginning. There would be engagement parties, bridal showers, dress fittings, and 1,000 small events where I would smile and nod while secretly counting down the minutes until I could escape. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Madison herself texting the family group chat. "Just booked the most incredible venue, can't wait for you all to see it. This is going to be the wedding of our dreams." I stared at the screen, a strange feeling washing over me as I read about this incredible venue. Something about those words made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't quite place why. 3 immediate responses popped up from our parents and relatives, all expressing excitement and pride. I hesitated, then typed, "So excited for you. Can't wait to see what you've chosen." As I stood there holding her wedding invitation, I made a decision that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. I was going to attend Madison's wedding, no matter how painful the comparisons might be. What I didn't realize was that this wedding would force me to confront a secret I'd been keeping for years, one that would turn everything my family believed about me completely upside down. 8 years ago, I made a decision that would either make me or break me. I was 27, sitting in my sterile corporate marketing office on the 32nd floor in Manhattan, staring at spreadsheets tracking engagement rates for products I didn't care about. The work paid well, very well, but each day felt like wearing a costume that never fit. I'd been saving aggressively since college, living in a tiny Queens studio while colleagues rented trendy Soho apartments. My bank account held $150,000, money stashed away with a vague notion I'd one day do something meaningful. What I hadn't told my family was that Grandma Harper had left me an additional $100,000 when she passed 2 years earlier. They knew of the inheritance but assumed it was small. I let them think that. Everything changed during a work conference in Miami. I was supposed to network with clients, but I wandered the hotel's event spaces, mesmerized by the way the staff transformed empty rooms into celebrations. I stayed up until 3 a.m., talking to the event coordinator, asking about vendors' timelines, and the business of creating joy. Back in New York, I couldn't focus on quarterly reports or marketing funnels. I researched hospitality during lunch breaks, read trade publications on the subway, visited venues on weekends under the guise of attending friends' events. The more I learned, the more convinced I became this was what I was meant to do. Telling my family was like announcing I planned to join a circus. At Sunday dinner in Greenwich, the same dining room where Madison had announced her Harvard acceptance, first promotion, engagement to someone from a family whose wealth dated to the Mayflower, I said I've decided to leave Morrison and Associates. I want to work in hospitality and events. The silence was deafening. Dad set down his fork precisely like calculating stress loads. Mom's teacher looked kicked in, the one she used on students insisting they didn't need to study. Hospitality, Dad repeated as if I'd suggested becoming a unicorn trainer. Like restaurants, events, I said. Weddings, corporate functions, celebrations. I want to learn from the ground up. Madison, scrolling through her phone, looked up. Riley, you have good job benefits, security, and clear advancement. Why throw that away for uncertainty? Because it doesn't feel like living. I wanted to say. Instead, I think I could be really good at it. The conversation became an intervention. Uncle Warren quoted small business failure rates. Mom worried about health insurance and finances. Dad asked if I truly understood what I was giving up. Madison, in her way, said, if this is what you want, try it. But maybe as a side business, I understood their concern, but felt it as a vote of no confidence. They couldn't see what I saw. Sometimes you risk everything comfortably to find something extraordinary. 3 weeks later, I gave notice and started part-time at Sterling Catering Company in Manhattan. Owner, Maria Sterling. A tough Italian woman who'd built the business from nothing. Had no patience for mistakes. I learned to fold napkins into swan-set tables with mathematical precision and carry trays without spilling champagne. The work was physically exhausting, mentally challenging in ways corporate never had been. Every event was different. Every client had impossible deadlines. I learned to think on my feet when the wedding cake melted. The band's equipment failed, and a bridesmaid panicked minutes before the ceremony. Family reactions ranged from polite concern to barely concealed disappointment. Conversations about work became awkward detours. When relatives asked, I'd say I worked in hospitality. They nodded with the kind of strained smile reserved for cult announcements. Meanwhile, I spent every free moment researching. I studied venue owners' profit margins, operational efficiency, attended conferences, networked with vendors. Working for someone else was just the beginning. I had bigger plans beyond folding napkins and coordinating deliveries. The learning curve was brutal. Success required understanding logistics, managing cash flow, navigating regulations, and building vendor relationships. I worked 16-hour days, studied contracts on the subway, and fell asleep reading insurance policies. In 2018, I found her Willowbrook estate in Westchester County, a neglected 1920s mansion with good bones but terrible management. Asking price, $500. I was in every penny I'd saved plus an SBA loan that kept me awake nights. Renovating it was like solving 1,000 puzzles. Permits, historical contractors, designers balancing vintage charm with modern functionality, electrical, plumbing, 8A compliance, a commercial kitchen, everything needed work. That's when I met David Kim, the architect overseeing structural improvements. From our first meeting, I knew he understood my vision. He saw not just what spaces were, but what they could become. We walked the mansion, discussing load-bearing walls and sightlines, but the conversations often wandered into deeper territory: how architecture influenced emotion, how lighting connected people, how spaces encouraged celebration. Gradually, our professional relationship became personal. The first wedding at Willowbrook was a disaster. The catering truck got lost, flowers were wrong. A thunderstorm knocked out power for 2 hours. I ran around coordinating by phone, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Somehow we pulled it together. Staff rallied, David found lanterns, and the bride later said it was the most magical day of her life. She said the blackout made everyone feel closer, more present. That review led to more bookings, and suddenly I had a business. By 2019, I expanded. I created Harper Holdings LLC, acquiring properties others saw as problems, but I saw as possibilities: a beachfront Hamptons property, a historic Berkshire's Inn, a Brooklyn rooftop space. Each was a calculated risk, terrifying and thrilling. Success wasn't just beautiful spaces, it was understanding dreams, creating experiences, and building a team to execute flawlessly. Growth was methodical but aggressive. I analyzed financials, market trends, systematic renovation, and operations. By 2022, I owned 7 venues, employed 150 people. Properties booked solid, earned industry recognition, and attracted clients willing to pay premium prices. Breakthrough came in 2023, hosting a tech billionaire's daughter's wedding. Featured in 3 major magazines, Forbes included me in 30 Under 30, calling me a hospitality visionary. My phone rang with inquiries from celebrities, Fortune 500 executives, and families sparing no expense for perfection. Today, Morgan Hospitality Group owns 12 luxury venues across the Northeast, with annual revenue over $350 million and 450 employees. We've hosted senators' daughters' celebrity weddings, corporate retreats, and anniversary celebrations. Every venue has its personality, its story, making every celebration feel like the world's most important event. Yet my family still thinks I work in food service, setting up tables and coordinating vendor deliveries. I never corrected them. I wanted them to love me for who I am, not my success or wealth. Maybe naive? Maybe I should have shared my achievements. But keeping this secret felt pure, authentic, a world apart from comparisons and expectations. As I sat in my penthouse looking at Madison's wedding invitation, I realized maintaining this secret was about to get much more complicated. Madison approached wedding planning like a military campaign, complete with spreadsheets, vendor charts, and a Pinterest board with over 3,000 pins. She was methodical, perfection-driven. This was her chance to prove Harper could create something spectacular. For months, our family chat was flooded with venue updates, photos of ballrooms, gardens, historic mansions, each with notes on capacity, catering, and exclusivity. Madison had devised a scoring system factoring architectural beauty, social media appeal, and overall wow factor. Budget conversations at family dinners grew tense. Mom and Dad tried to be supportive, but $280,000 was a stretch for their retirement savings. Venue rental alone, $50,000. Premium catering, $80,000. Floral arrangements, $40,000. Live orchestra, $30,000. Photography, videography, and extras, $80,000. I could have helped, but any offer from me would raise questions about my wealth. So I stayed silent, watching my parents wrestle with financing her dream. The breakthrough came when Madison hired Sophia Chen, a top Northeast wedding planner. One of Sophia's select venues was managed by Harper Holdings LLC. Madison had no idea she was eyeing my flagship property. I was in my office reviewing reports when Gabriel Santos, Grandview Estates general manager, called. Miss Harper, a wedding planner, requested a site visit for a September wedding. The client is Madison Blackwood, booking as Madison Harper. Any connection? My stomach dropped. Madison had found my oceanfront estate, the property I'd spent 3 years transforming. No connection, I said, forcing normalcy. Standard protocols, standard pricing. But the planner said this is for her sister's wedding. The client seems above her family's usual social circle. Handle differently. I closed my eyes, picturing Madison in the marble ballroom, on the terrace where David and I had shared our first kiss, in the bridal suite I'd curated. She was about to fall in love with my creation without knowing I had built it. For moments like hers, standard protocols, I repeated. And Gabriel, my ownership stays completely confidential. A week later, Madison's social media exploded with photos of her venue visit. Arms spread wide, face glowing, she called it absolutely magical. The family chat lit up. Mom called it the most beautiful venue ever. Dad admitted being impressed despite costs. Uncle Warren noted it looked magazine-worthy. The sting came during her FaceTime with her maid of honor, Dr. Isabella Reed. Bella, you have to see this place. Madison gushed, showing photos Sophia had taken. Grandview Estate is perfect. Oceanfront, historic, gorgeous ballroom. Incredibly expensive, Isabella replied. Are you sure your family can afford it? Madison laughed sharply. We're stretching, but Ethan's family expects sophistication. At least one Harper will have a respectable wedding. Poor Riley will probably get married at a community center if she ever finds someone. I love her, but I have no sense of style or ambition. This wedding shows what our family can do when someone takes charge. I nicked my finger, chopping vegetables, the sting minor compared to her dismissal of my future. She had no idea the venue she adored existed because of me, my vision, risk, and investment. That night, David texted about a booking confirmation he'd seen. Madison Harper, September. Any relation? My sister's wedding. She doesn't know I own it, I typed. That's complicated. Are you going to tell her I don't know? She's so happy and thinks I'm incapable of anything respectable. The woman who built Grandview Estate is capable of anything. Your sister just doesn't know it yet, he replied. Over the next few days, Madison's excitement grew. Posts about floral arrangements, lighting, oceanfront views. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad quietly recalculated loans and budgets, stressed to give Madison her dream wedding. I made a decision that felt generous and slightly insane. I called Sophia, disguising my voice slightly. I have a client whose wishes to remain anonymous, I said. They want to cover the entire wedding venue, vendors, everything. Families should think a friend of theirs is contributing. Sophia was skeptical until I wired the full $280,000. Gratitude replaced doubt. She called Madison with the news. I listened from the next room as Madison's voice, rising with disbelief and joy, shared the news with our parents. Gabriel called an hour later, puzzled by the unusual payment, but confirmed all fees were paid. I instructed strict anonymity. Completely, I said. This wedding should be perfect for the bride. That's all that matters. That evening, Madison posted a photo at Grandview Estate, feeling blessed. The venue of my dreams, and an angel made it possible. Sometimes the universe conspires perfectly. This is going to be magical. She had no idea her angel was sitting 3 miles away, watching her celebration, wondering if kindness could coexist with heartbreak. The venue she called perfect existed because her supposedly unsuccessful sister had dared to dream bigger than anyone in our family could imagine. Watching her joy unfold on social media tagged at my property, I realized keeping this secret would soon be far more complicated than I anticipated. Sitting in my penthouse, I stared at my phone as Madison continued posting photos and sharing moments from her Grandview Estate tour. She laughed, arms outstretched as if to embrace the ocean behind her. completely unaware that the person who had made this dream a reality was just a few miles away watching but unable to intervene. Part of me wanted to run down and reveal everything to prove that I, too, could accomplish extraordinary things. But another part that protected me from expectation from comparison insisted the secret remain. David texted me, gently but perceptively. This might be the heaviest feeling in your career, joy and pain at the same time. You want recognition, but you don't want Madison to know. What will you do? I read it over and over, my fingers tracing the screen unconsciously. I didn't want her happiness entangled with my story. Didn't want her to think I was wielding power or wealth to teach her anything. Her joy had to be hers alone, pure and untouched. Still, there were moments when bitterness crept in. Madison spoke of me to family and friends as if I had never had ambition or ability. She laughed, imagining I might marry at a community center, never realizing that I had transformed Grandview Estate into a haven for dreams like hers. That mix of sadness and pride twisted inside me, like standing on the edge of a cliff staring at the ocean, but too afraid to jump. And then there was David. He understood me in ways no one else could. Walking through Grandview together, discussing lighting wall proportions, table layouts, I saw admiration, empathy, and pure joy in his eyes. He didn't need me to explain the pressure, the judgment, or the struggle to prove myself. We shared a world where only those willing to take risks could understand, a world where failure and success intertwined, where passion and love for your work could create something magical. Yet alongside the joy and pride, one truth remained: Madison would soon have her wedding, and the secret I had worked so hard to protect wouldn't last forever. One day she would look back and confront the truth. Would she feel betrayed, or would she understand the love, effort, and sacrifice I had poured into making her dreams come true without anyone ever noticing? I put my phone down and took a deep breath. This secret was a gift, a challenge, and a responsibility. And I knew, however difficult, I would continue to guard it, at least until Madison walked down the aisle, completely blissful, unaware of everything I had done to create the magic for her special day. Sunday dinners at the Harper house had always felt like performance reviews, but the weeks leading up to Madison's wedding turned them into something closer to tribunal hearings. I arrived 20 minutes late, wearing jeans and a wrinkled blazer, hair in a messy ponytail, the result of a crisis at Willowbrook Estate. A vendor had delivered the wrong linens for a Saturday wedding, and I'd spent hours driving between rental companies, loading linens into my car, and supervising setup to ensure everything was perfect. But my family didn't know any of that. They only saw me walking into Mom's dining room looking disheveled and distracted, confirming every assumption they had about my priorities. "Riley, honey," Uncle Warren said as I took my seat between Cousin Blake and Aunt Brenda. "You look like you've been running marathons. Is everything all right?" "Work emergency," I replied, trying to smooth my hair. Madison lit up the table with her bridesmaid announcements: Dr. Isabella Reed, pediatric surgeon, and Zoe Chang, tech entrepreneur with an 80-mile exit. Then she turned to me, and of course Riley will be my third bridesmaid. The pause that followed was deafening. "Riley works in hospitality events," Madison added carefully. "She's still finding herself professionally." Blake patted my shoulder patronizingly. "Everyone develops at their own pace. The service industry teaches good work ethic." David's text buzzed: "Hope your family dinner is going better than expected. You're amazing no matter what anyone thinks." I slipped the phone back into my purse, not wanting to explain our relationship. The conversation moved on to Madison and Ethan's future plans: Hamptons, houses, European honeymoon, Ethan's investment portfolio. I tried to contribute insights about hospitality and event management, but my attempts were ignored or redirected. When I mentioned managing multiple events across locations, Warren changed the subject. When I spoke of staffing challenges, Brenda asked about Madison's dress. My family had constructed a narrative of my life that left no room for expertise or professional insights. The most painful moment came when Mom asked me to help clear the table while the others discussed Madison's career trajectory and Ethan's successes. As I carried plates to the kitchen, I heard Blake explaining plans for a second orthopedic practice, Warren discussing his promotion, and Brenda detailing a corporate contract. Mom followed me, arranging leftover pot roast. "Riley, I wanted to talk about the wedding guest list," she said. "The Blackwoods are accomplished federal judges, business owners, medical professionals. They operate in a different social circle than we're used to. I want to make sure you feel comfortable. Dress appropriately for the venue level, and maybe avoid talking about work unless asked. Not because there's anything wrong with your job, but to focus on celebrating Madison rather than navigating awkward conversations about career differences." Standing in my childhood kitchen, surrounded by the familiar floral wallpaper and ceramic roosters, I realized something profound. My family had built an entire reality about my Life based on assumptions. They believed I was struggling professionally, socially, and financially, and every interaction reinforced that narrative. Their concern wasn't cruelty, they were protective, but their protection misrepresented who I had become. The irony was staggering. They worried I'd feel uncomfortable at a venue I owned, concerned I might embarrass myself in front of successful people, suggesting I avoid talking about work when I had literally created the space where Madison's dream wedding would unfold. Finishing the dishwasher, I rejoined the family, knowing revealing the truth now would sound delusional. How could I explain I owned 12 luxury venues without seeming like I was boasting? How could I prove I employed 450 people without appearing to seek attention? Their assumptions were entrenched, built over years, and dismantling them would take more than words. After helping Mom with the last of the dishes, I retreated to the small corner of the kitchen I'd claimed as my thinking space. I needed a moment to breathe, to let the weight of the evening settle. The faint hum of the dishwasher mixed with the clinking of silverware created a rhythm that almost felt meditative. My thoughts circled back to the wedding, to Madison, and to the invisible barrier between my family's perception of me and the reality of what I had built. I thought about the Grandview estate, the countless hours I'd spent transforming it into a dream venue. I could see every detail in my mind: the sweeping marble staircase, the soft glow of chandeliers over the ballroom, the oceanfront terrace catching the sunset just right. It was ironic, almost cruelly so, that the very space where Madison's most important day would unfold was my creation, and yet she had no idea. To her it was magic, to me it was strategy, labor, and vision. My phone buzzed again with a series of photos from David, showing freshly polished floors, arranged floral displays, and perfectly set tables. Even in pictures, the venue radiated elegance. I smiled at his note, "Everything looks perfect. Can't wait for the big day, your sister's going to be wowed." I felt a pang of bittersweet pride. They wouldn't know, couldn't know. My accomplishments existed in parallel, hidden behind the assumptions my family had long held. I wondered if I would ever feel comfortable revealing the truth. Would they finally see me? Or see a stranger masquerading as the Riley they thought they knew? Dinner conversation from the living room drifted into my quiet space, muffled laughter forming a background hum. Madison's excitement was infectious, but it highlighted the chasm between her reality and mine. She had grown up celebrated, every success instantly acknowledged. My victories, though grand, were silent, measured in flawless events and delighted clients. I thought about David, about how he understood the nuance of what I did, not just logistics or finances, but the artistry and emotional weight behind every event. That recognition was something I had come to rely on. I wished my family could see it the same way, but I knew their concern was about societal expectations, the image of a successful career. Attention crept in, one I hadn't anticipated. The closer Madison's wedding approached, the more I realized my role would be paradoxically invisible. I was the architect of perfection, yet I would occupy the background, a silent observer while everyone celebrated her. It was the price of anonymity, and I had accepted it. But the human part of me, pride, longing, desire for acknowledgement, stirred uneasily. Leaning against the counter, I let my mind wander over the past years. Long nights at Sterling Catering, endless spreadsheets and site visits, relentless drive to acquire properties and build venues. It had all been for moments like this, not for recognition, not for praise. I had done it to prove to myself that I could, believing that creating beauty and joy in others' lives was worth the sacrifice. Yet standing there, I realized self-satisfaction could only carry me so far. Humans craved acknowledgement and connection, and I had chosen to hide the most extraordinary parts of my life from the people who should have been proud. It was a strange, lonely paradox. I had built worlds for strangers, yet my family remained blissfully unaware. I heard laughter shift from the living room. Madison was probably showing Ethan something, their voices bright and animated. I took a deep breath and smiled softly. There would be time to reveal pieces of my truth later, in quiet conversations or moments that couldn't be ignored. For now, I had a choice: to step back, watch her happiness unfold, and cherish the role I had played, even if invisible. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about recognition. It was about family, about celebration, and about the silent threads of effort that wove unforgettable moments into reality. In that understanding, I found a measure of peace. The Blackwood estate in Old Greenwich looked like something from a Ralph Lauren catalog. All weathered shingles and manicured gardens that spoke of generations of carefully managed wealth. As I drove through the wrought iron gates, past the circular driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, I felt like I was entering a world where my family's modest success would be measured and found wanting. The welcome reception was being held in their garden pavilion, a structure that probably cost more than most people's houses. String quartet music drifted across the perfectly manicured lawn where guests mingled with champagne glasses and conversations about summer houses and charity galas. Catherine Blackwood greeted me at the entrance with the kind of warm smile that wealthy people perfect for social occasions. She was elegant in that effortless way that comes from never having to worry about money, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Riley, how wonderful to finally meet you," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Madison has told us so much about you. We're so excited to welcome you into our family celebration." Theodore Blackwood appeared beside his wife, equally polished and welcoming. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to boardrooms and country clubs, with silver hair and a smile that suggested he was genuinely pleased to meet me despite whatever Madison might have told them about my circumstances. "Welcome to our home," he said, gesturing toward the gardens where guests were gathered around cocktail tables. "Please help yourself to refreshments and make yourself comfortable. We want you to feel completely at home here." Their initial warmth was genuine, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that this evening might be different from the usual family gatherings where I felt like a charity case being politely tolerated. That hope lasted approximately 15 minutes. "So, Riley," Catherine said as we stood near the bar, "Madison mentioned you work in events. How exciting that must be, creating beautiful celebrations for people. Are you planning to start your own catering business someday?" The question was perfectly reasonable, and I started to explain that I actually did own my own business, that I had built something significant in the hospitality industry. But before I could form a complete sentence, Madison appeared beside us with her characteristic need to control every conversation. "Oh no," Madison said with a laugh that sounded both fond and dismissive. "Riley isn't the entrepreneur type. She does setup and coordination for other people's events. It's honest work though, and she's very dedicated." I felt the familiar sting of being defined by someone else's limited understanding of my life. But Catherine's response was worse than Madison's interruption. Her smile became more careful, more polite, the way people adjust their expressions when they realize they've overestimated someone's social status. Theodore stepped in with practiced diplomatic kindness. "The service industry is the backbone of America," he said, his tone suggesting he was being deliberately generous. "Very noble calling, making sure people's special days go smoothly." I wanted to correct them, to explain that I wasn't just working in the service industry but actually owning and operating multiple luxury venues. But something about their expressions, the careful way they were now speaking to me, made it clear that any attempt to clarify would sound like desperate overcompensation. The conversation moved on to safer topics. Ethan's sister Caroline was a federal prosecutor, and his brother Michael had just been accepted to Yale Law School. The family discussed these achievements with the casual confidence of people accustomed to success, each accomplishment building on generations of educational and professional excellence. My phone buzzed with a text from David, and I stepped away from the group to read it discreetly. "How are you holding up?" he had written. "Remember that their opinions don't define your worth." I typed back quickly. "Getting the usual treatment. They think I coordinate table settings for a living." "Want me to come get you?" he replied immediately. "You don't have to endure this." I appreciated his offer, but I could see Madison watching me from across the garden, and I knew that leaving early would only confirm whatever narrative she had already shared about my limitations and social awkwardness. "I'm okay," I texted back. "We'll call you later." As I returned to the group, I overheard Caroline asking Madison about future family planning, specifically about potential godparents for children she and Ethan might have someday. "We're thinking about family involvement," Madison said, glancing in my direction. "Though of course we want to be thoughtful about influences and role models." The conversation continued around me, touching on schools and summer camps and the importance of exposing children to diverse but appropriate experiences. I realized that I was being evaluated not just as Madison's sister but as a potential influence on future Blackwood grandchildren, and I was apparently being found lacking. Later in the evening, I was standing near the garden fountain when I overheard a conversation that shattered whatever emotional equilibrium I had managed to maintain. Catherine was speaking with Madison near the rose garden, their voices carrying across the still evening air. "I hope you don't mind me asking," Catherine said, "but I'm concerned about what kind of influence Riley might have on future grandchildren. Given her limited professional prospects and apparent lack of ambition, I worry about the messages she might send about success and achievement." Madison's response was swift and reassuring. "Don't worry about Riley at all," she said. "She's sweet but not driven. She won't be a role model for career success. If anything, she's more like our family's cautionary tale about following unrealistic dreams instead of practical goals." I felt something inside me break as I listened to my sister reduce my life to a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when people aim too high without the talent or intelligence to succeed. In Madison's narrative, I wasn't someone who had taken risks and built something meaningful. I was someone who had failed to accept my limitations and was now living with the consequences of unrealistic ambitions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversations and careful smiles. I found myself nodding along to discussions about topics I actually knew quite well, from event logistics to hospitality trends, while being treated like someone whose insights were based on limited experience rather than extensive expertise. When Theodore asked about my thoughts on destination weddings, I shared observations about international vendor coordination and cultural considerations that came from years of managing events across multiple countries. But my comments were received with the kind of patient attention people give to well-meaning but inexperienced opinions. When Catherine inquired about seasonal staffing challenges in the service industry, I explained the complexities of managing hundreds of employees across multiple properties during peak wedding season. But my explanation was met with sympathetic nods that suggested they thought I was sharing secondhand knowledge rather than personal experience. I left the reception an hour earlier than planned, citing an early morning work commitment that wasn't entirely fabricated. I did have a conference call with vendors in California, though it wasn't until noon the next day. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Greenwich, past the manicured lawns and elegant houses that represented everything my family aspired to, I felt the weight of living a double life. In one world, I was a successful entrepreneur who employed hundreds of people and created magical experiences for clients who paid premium prices for excellence. In another world, I was the family disappointment whose biggest achievement was maintaining steady employment in food service. The most painful part wasn't the condescension or the pity. It was the realization that Madison genuinely believed she was protecting me by managing expectations and controlling narratives about my life. In her mind, she wasn't being cruel by calling me a cautionary tale. She was being realistic about my limitations and helping others understand why they shouldn't expect too much from me. I texted David when I reached my apartment. Tonight was brutal. My family thinks I'm a cautionary tale about unrealistic dreams. His response came immediately: their loss. You're living proof that dreams aren't unrealistic when you have the courage to pursue them. As I sat in my penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the empire I had built while my family worried about my future prospects, I realized that keeping my secret was no longer about protecting their feelings or maintaining authentic relationships. It was about protecting myself from the devastation of discovering that even the truth. The morning of Madison's wedding, I arrived at Grandview Estate before sunrise, driving through the gates of my own property like a guest sneaking into someone else's celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me as I parked in the staff lot and walked through the service entrance, avoiding the main entrance where wedding vendors were already beginning their setup. Natasha Price, my head event coordinator, was orchestrating the transformation with military precision. She spotted me immediately and approached with her tablet and the kind of focused energy that came from managing events worth more than most people's annual salaries. "Miss Harper," she said quietly, using the code we had established for maintaining my anonymity, "everything is proceeding according to your specifications." The floral team arrived at 5, catering prep started at 4:30, and the string quartet will begin sound check at 9. I nodded, watching from a distance as my staff transformed the estate into Madison's dream wedding venue. $40,000 worth of white orchids and peonies were being arranged throughout the ballroom and garden terrace. The Italian linens I had specially imported were being draped over tables that would seat 200 guests. The celebrity chef I had hired was setting up stations in the kitchen I had designed specifically for events of this magnitude. "Any issues I should know about?" I asked Natasha, though I could see from the smooth coordination that everything was running flawlessly. "One small concern," she replied, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "The bride arrived 20 minutes ago and has been directing staff as if she's the property owner. She rearranged the welcome table twice and asked 3 different vendors to make changes to their setups." I watched Madison across the garden, gesturing animatedly while talking to the photographer about optimal lighting angles. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair in a messy bun. But she moved through the space with the confidence of someone who believed she belonged there completely. "Let her make whatever changes she wants," I told Natasha. "This is her day. Just ensure the final result meets our quality standards." From my position near the kitchen entrance, I could hear Madison talking to her bridesmaids as they arrived for the morning preparations. Dr. Isabella Reed stepped out of a Tesla wearing designer athleisure that probably cost more than most people spent on formal wear. Zoe Chang arrived in a chauffeur-driven car, taking business calls even as she walked toward the bridal preparation suite. "I can't believe we got this venue," Madison was saying, her voice carrying across the morning air. "Do you know how exclusive this is? Most people wait 3 years for a booking. Here, the waiting list is insane." Isabella looked around with genuine appreciation. "Madison, this place is incredible. How did you even find out about it? I have excellent taste in finding hidden gems," Madison replied, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "Plus, I negotiated the best package deal through connections. You have to know how to work these situations." I felt a strange mix of pride and pain listening to her praise the venue I had created while taking credit for discovering and securing it. Part of me was thrilled that she loved what I had built. Another part of me was frustrated that she couldn't imagine her own sister might be capable of creating something this beautiful. The bridal preparation suite was located in what had once been the mansion's master bedroom. I had renovated it specifically for wedding parties, with perfect lighting for hair and makeup, comfortable seating areas, and floor-to-ceiling windows that provided natural light and garden views. As the bridesmaids settled in for their morning preparations, I positioned myself in the adjacent service corridor where I could hear their conversations without being seen. Isabella was discussing her latest research grant, a $2 million federal funding award for pediatric cardiac surgery. Innovation. Her work was saving children's lives, and she spoke about it with the kind of passion that came from meaningful purpose. Zoe was on her phone negotiating terms for her third startup launch, casually mentioning $50 million in venture capital funding as if she were discussing weekend plans. Between calls, she explained her new company's artificial intelligence applications in healthcare ideas that could revolutionize medical diagnostics. When they asked about my career plans, Madison answered before I could speak. "Riley is focusing on work-life balance right now," she said while the makeup artist applied foundation with professional precision. "Not everyone needs to climb corporate ladders or chase aggressive goals. She's content with simpler aspirations, and that's actually quite healthy." Isabella and Zoe nodded politely, the way successful people do when discussing someone whose ambitions they can't relate to but don't want to judge openly. I stood in the hallway listening to my sister define my life as an exercise in limited expectations, knowing that the venue where we were having this conversation existed because I had risked everything to pursue dreams she considered unrealistic. The most painful moment came when Madison began practicing her speech, the one she would deliver during the reception dinner. I listened through the door as she ran through her gratitude list, thanking everyone who had supported her journey to this moment. "I want to thank my parents for their unwavering belief in my potential." She rehearsed, her voice emotional and sincere. "Uncle Warren for his career guidance and professional mentorship. Aunt Brenda for showing me that creativity and business success can coexist beautifully. Cousin Blake for inspiring me to pursue excellence in everything I do." She paused, and I held my breath wondering if she would mention me. "And I want to acknowledge all the family and friends who have shaped who I am." Today, she continued, but my name never came. In Madison's narrative of gratitude and achievement, I was apparently not significant enough to warrant specific recognition. I stepped away from the door and walked to the far end of the corridor, pulling out my phone to text David. This is harder than I expected. Listening to her take credit for finding this place while explaining that I'm not ambitious enough for real success. His response came immediately. "I'm already dressed and ready. Just say the word and I'll be there early to support you." I appreciated his offer, but having David arrive early would raise questions about who he was and why he was attending the wedding. My family didn't know about our relationship, and introducing him now would create complications I wasn't ready to handle. "I'll be okay," I texted back. "See you at the ceremony. Can't wait to show you around the place." His next message made me smile despite everything. "I've already seen your masterpiece. Today, I get to watch you be gracious while other people claim credit for your vision. That takes more strength than building empires." As the morning progressed, I found myself moving through my own property like a ghost, observing the preparations for Madison's wedding while remaining invisible to the celebration. I watched the catering team execute the menu I had designed with the celebrity chef. I saw the floral arrangements that followed specifications I had provided during countless planning meetings. I observed the lighting setup that highlighted architectural features I had specifically included in the renovation design. Every detail of this wedding reflected decisions I had made, investments I had authorized, and creative vision I had implemented. The anonymous family friend who had covered the wedding costs wasn't mysterious at all. It was me standing 30 feet away, watching my sister prepare to marry the man she loved in a venue I had built, specifically for moments like this. But perhaps the most complicated part was realizing that despite everything, I genuinely wanted Madison's wedding to be perfect. I wanted her to feel beautiful and loved and celebrated. I wanted her marriage to Ethan to begin with joy and hope and all the magic that a truly special wedding can create. Even as I listened to her diminish my ambitions and take credit for my work, I found myself mentally checking details and ensuring that every aspect of her day would exceed her expectations. Because regardless of how she saw me, regardless of how my family had constructed their narrative about my limitations, I loved Madison enough to give her the wedding of her dreams. As the morning preparations continued around me, I realized that today would test more than my ability to keep secrets. It would test my capacity for grace under pressure, and my commitment to love without requiring recognition in return. The real question was whether I could maintain both my anonymity and my sanity when the celebration began in earnest. The ceremony began at exactly 4 o'clock, with 200 guests seated in white chairs arranged across the oceanfront lawn I had personally landscaped 3 years earlier. The September afternoon was perfect, with golden light filtering through the oak trees I had preserved during renovation and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt air and late summer roses. I stood at the altar holding Madison's bouquet, watching her marry Ethan against the backdrop of Long Island Sound. She looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, which I had secretly paid to have professionally restored and altered when the original seamstress quoted a price that made Mom wince. The happiness on her face was genuine and infectious, and despite everything that had happened between us, I felt genuinely joy for her in that moment. The ceremony itself was flawless. The string quartet played perfectly. The floral arrangements created exactly the romantic atmosphere Madison had dreamed of, and the photography captured every moment with artistic precision. Guests murmured appreciation for the venue's beauty, several commenting quietly about the exclusive nature of the location and the obvious expense involved in securing such a spectacular setting. During the photo session that followed, the photographer positioned the wedding party around the estate's most photogenic locations. I found myself strategically placed behind the other bridesmaids in most shots, a positioning that everyone understood without discussion. Isabella and Zoe looked stunning in their bridesmaid dresses, their successful careers somehow translating into the kind of confidence that photographs beautifully. David arrived during cocktail hour, looking handsome in a perfectly tailored navy suit that made several unmarried guests notice him immediately. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in social situations, though I knew he was scanning the environment to assess how I was holding up emotionally. Our eyes met across the garden terrace, and he gave me a subtle smile that conveyed both support and admiration. To the other guests, he was simply an attractive stranger, probably someone's +1 or a friend of the groom's family. No one suspected that he was my boyfriend of 3 years, or that he had designed several architectural elements of the venue where they were celebrating. The cocktail hour conversation was everything I had expected and dreaded. Guests speculated about the venue's exclusivity and cost, praising Madison's taste and planning skills. Uncle Warren approached me during the reception, gesturing toward the mansion's facade with obvious appreciation. "Riley, this venue is absolutely spectacular," he said, sipping his champagne while gazing at the oceanfront views. "Madison really outdid herself finding this place. Do you have any idea what something like this costs to book?" "I suspect it's quite expensive," I replied carefully, watching him calculate numbers in his head the way lawyers do when they encounter impressive displays of wealth. "Must be nice to experience this level of luxury," Aunt Brenda added, joining our conversation with the kind of wistful tone people use when discussing things they assume are beyond their reach. "I hope you're taking mental notes about how events like this are executed. This is really how it's done at the highest level." The irony of receiving event planning advice about my own venue was almost too much to process. But I nodded appropriately and made appreciative comments about the attention to detail and professional coordination. The most challenging moment came when there was a vendor crisis that required immediate owner approval. The premium champagne supplier had discovered a shortage of the specific vintage that had been ordered for the reception toasts. The replacement option was significantly more expensive, requiring an additional $5,000 authorization that only I could approve. Natasha approached me discreetly near the garden fountain, speaking quietly to avoid attracting attention. "Miss Harper," she whispered, "we have a situation with the champagne service. The Dom Perignon 2008 isn't available, but we can substitute Dom Perignon 2006 at additional cost. I need owner approval immediately." I quickly signed the authorization on her tablet, trying to complete the transaction without drawing notice from nearby guests. But Madison noticed me handling what appeared to be vendor paperwork and approached with curiosity. "Riley, what was that about?" she asked, her bride's intuition sensing something unusual about the interaction. "Just helping coordinate some vendor logistics," I said, hoping my explanation sounded casual rather than evasive. "Sometimes they need additional signatures for delivery confirmations." Madison accepted my explanation without further questions, but I could see her processing the interaction. In her understanding of my role in the hospitality industry, coordinating vendor paperwork was exactly the kind of responsibility someone in my position might handle. As the reception transitioned from cocktails to dinner, I overheard conversations that revealed how completely my family had accepted the narrative about my limited prospects. Cousin Blake was explaining to one of Ethan's relatives that the Harper family included various levels of achievement, some more successful than others. Uncle Warren mentioned to a business associate that families always include members who choose different paths, some more ambitious than others. David caught my attention from across the reception area, raising his eyebrows in a silent question about whether I needed rescue from the social dynamics. I shook my head slightly, indicating that I could handle the situation, though I appreciated his readiness to intervene if necessary. The dinner service began with guests taking their assigned seats at tables, decorated with centerpieces that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. The celebrity chef's menu was executed flawlessly, each course presented with the kind of artistic precision that justified the premium pricing my venues commanded. I found myself seated at a table with Madison's college friends and their spouses, successful professionals who discussed market trends, investment strategies, and career advancement with the casual expertise of people accustomed to high achievement. They were kind enough to include me in conversations, asking polite questions about my work in hospitality and nodding sympathetically when I described the challenges of coordinating events for demanding clients. What struck me most was how genuinely nice these people were. They weren't intentionally condescending or exclusionary. They simply operated from assumptions about social and professional hierarchies that placed me in a specific category, and they interacted with me accordingly. In their minds, they were being appropriately inclusive by engaging someone from a different professional level in their conversations. When one of them asked about my thoughts on luxury service standards, I shared insights about client expectations and operational excellence that came from years of managing premium venues. But my comments were received as the observations of someone who worked in the industry rather than someone who owned it. Well-meaning opinions from someone with limited perspective rather than expert analysis from extensive experience. The most painful part was realizing that even if I revealed the truth about my success, some of these people might not believe it. The narrative about my limitations had become so established that contradicting it would require more evidence than a simple conversation could provide. As dinner concluded and guests prepared for dancing, I excused myself to check on behind-the-scenes coordination. Natasha provided updates on timing for the evening events, confirmed that all vendor payments were processed correctly, and assured me that the staff was handling the high-pressure service expectations flawlessly. Standing in the service corridor of my own venue, watching the celebration unfold through windows I had specifically positioned to provide optimal views, I felt the strange duality of my situation intensify. I was simultaneously the most important person at this wedding and the least significant, the property owner who had made everything possible, and the family member whose contributions were invisible to everyone who mattered. The evening was approaching its most critical moments, and I could sense that the careful balance I had maintained between my public and private identities was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Something was building toward a breaking point, and I wasn't sure I would be able to control what happened when that moment finally arrived. The dinner reception began with a series of toasts that celebrated everyone's achievements except mine. Ethan's father spoke eloquently about family traditions and the importance of marrying into families that shared similar values and aspirations. Catherine Blackwood praised Madison's intelligence and professional accomplishments, noting how perfectly she fit into their family's culture of excellence. Madison had been drinking champagne steadily throughout the cocktail hour and dinner service, her cheeks flushed with happiness and alcohol as she soaked up the compliments and congratulations from 200 guests. I watched her confidence grow with each toast, each celebration of her perfect choices and successful planning. When the microphone was passed to Madison for her speech, she stood with the kind of radiant joy that comes from being the center of positive attention on the most important day of your life. Her dress caught the golden evening light streaming through the ballroom windows, and for a moment she looked like the fairy tale princess she had always wanted to be. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Madison began, her voice clear and emotional. "This day has been absolutely perfect, and I'm so grateful to everyone who helped make it possible." She went through her gratitude list systematically, thanking the Blackwood family for welcoming her with such warmth and generosity. She praised Ethan's accomplishments and character, expressing excitement about building a life with someone who shared her ambitions and values. She acknowledged her bridesmaids, highlighting Isabella's life-saving medical work and Zoe's entrepreneurial success. Then she turned to our side of the family, and I felt my stomach tighten with anticipation. "I want to thank my parents for their sacrifices that made my success possible," Madison said, raising her champagne glass toward Mom and Dad. "Thank you for believing in me and supporting my dreams even when they seemed impossible." Uncle Warren, "Thank you for your professional guidance and for showing me what dedication to excellence looks like." Aunt Brenda, "Thank you for your creative inspiration and for proving that business success and artistic vision can coexist beautifully." She paused, looking around the room with satisfaction, and I held my breath waiting for my name. Cousin Blake, "Thank you for your example of pursuing medical excellence and for always inspiring me to push harder toward my goals." Another pause. More expectant silence. Madison's eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on me before moving on. "And I want to acknowledge that families aren't perfect," she continued, her voice taking on a different tone. "Sometimes we make mistakes in how we support each other. Sometimes we enable poor decisions instead of encouraging better choices." I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized where this was heading. "My sister Riley represents our family's biggest mistake," Madison said, her words slightly slurred from champagne but devastatingly clear. "Not her personally, but how we enabled her unrealistic dreams instead of helping her accept practical limitations. We should have pushed her towards stable career paths instead of letting her chase fantasy goals that were never going to work out." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 200 guests turned to look at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to uncomfortable embarrassment. I could feel my hands starting to shake as Madison continued her public analysis of my failures. "But Riley teaches us valuable lessons about resilience," Madison said, apparently convinced she was being generous. "She flew here from her tiny apartment, probably spent her grocery money on this bridesmaid dress, just to support family. That kind of simple dedication is touching. She may not have achievements worth mentioning, but she has good intentions and a sweet heart." The applause that followed was polite but painful, the kind of sympathy clapping usually reserved for participation awards and consolation prizes. I could see pity in the faces around me, along with relief that their own children had turned out so much better than the cautionary tale standing before them. Uncle Warren nodded approvingly at Madison's honesty about family dynamics. Aunt Brenda dabbed at her eyes as if Madison had delivered a touching tribute to overcome adversity. Cousin Blake looked satisfied that family truth-telling was finally happening, openly. Madison continued speaking about gratitude and future plans, but I couldn't process her words anymore. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing fresh air, and made my way toward the powder room on unsteady legs. In the marble bathroom I had designed with hand-selected fixtures and custom lighting, I gripped the vanity counter and tried to catch my breath. My reflection showed a woman in an expensive bridesmaid dress who looked like she was about to shatter into pieces. The contrast between my elegant surroundings and my emotional state would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. I pulled out my phone and texted David with trembling fingers. "I can't take much more of this. She just called me the family's biggest mistake in front of 200 people. His response came immediately. I heard it from my table. "I'm ready to leave whenever you are. Just say the word." I stared at his message, appreciating his support, but knowing that leaving now would only confirm Madison's narrative about my inability to handle social situations or meet family expectations. I had survived 35 years of comparisons and disappointments. I could survive one more evening. "I'm staying," I texted back. "But this is harder than building a business empire ever was." When I returned to the ballroom, Madison was accepting congratulations on her speech and her honesty about family dynamics. Several guests complimented her on her emotional maturity and her ability to love family members despite their limitations. Theodore Blackwood patted her shoulder approvingly, apparently impressed by her realistic assessment of family achievement levels. The dancing portion of the reception began with Madison and Ethan's first dance, a romantic moment that should have been purely joyful but felt tainted by the public humiliation I had just endured. I watched them move across the dance floor I had installed specifically for moments like this, surrounded by guests who now saw me as the family member who served as a Reminder of what happens when people aim too high without sufficient talent. David approached me during the second song, extending his hand with a subtle smile. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his voice gentle but determined. I took his hand gratefully, allowing him to lead me onto the dance floor where we could speak quietly, without being overheard. As we moved together to music played by musicians I had hired, he whispered reassurances that helped stabilize my emotional equilibrium. "You know who you are," he said softly. "Their opinions don't change what you've built or what you've accomplished. You're dancing in a ballroom you created at a wedding you funded, surrounded by success you generated." His words helped, but they couldn't completely erase the sting of being publicly defined as a family disappointment. Madison's speech had crystallized years of subtle comparisons and gentle condescension into one devastating moment of truth-telling that revealed how my family really saw me. As the evening continued around us, with guests celebrating Madison's perfect wedding and praising her excellent choices, I realized that my secret was becoming a burden rather than a protection. Hiding my success hadn't preserved authentic family relationships. It had allowed false narratives to calcify into accepted truth, creating a reality where my sister could publicly call me a mistake without any awareness of how wrong she was. The weight of living this double life was becoming unbearable, and I could feel something building toward a breaking point that would force me to choose between continued anonymity and self-preservation. Standing on the dance floor of my own venue, holding the man I loved while surrounded by people who pitied my limitations, I felt the careful control I had maintained over my dual identity beginning to slip in ways that might soon become impossible to manage. I returned from the powder room trying to compose myself, but the damage from Madison's speech felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. The reception continued around me, with guests complimenting Madison on her emotional honesty and mature perspective on family dynamics. Several people approached me with sympathetic smiles, the kind reserved for someone who had just been publicly identified as needing extra kindness. Madison was glowing as she accepted congratulations on both her wedding and her touching words about family acceptance. She moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, discussing her honeymoon plans to Europe and the house hunting process in the Hamptons. Every conversation reinforced her narrative about making smart choices and building a successful life. David remained close but not obviously protective, offering subtle support through meaningful glances and brief touches that helped anchor me emotionally. When Theodore Blackwood approached him to discuss architecture and design trends, David handled the conversation with professional grace while keeping one eye on my emotional state. What really hurt was watching Uncle Warren nod approvingly to anyone who mentioned Madison's speech. He seemed proud of her willingness to address difficult family truths, apparently viewing her public analysis of my limitations as evidence of mature emotional intelligence. That's when Gabriel Santos appeared at the main table carrying his tablet and wearing an expression that suggested he had reached the end of his patience with maintaining my anonymity. He had witnessed Madison's cruel speech, watched me endure public humiliation in my own venue, and apparently decided that enough was enough. Gabriel approached the head table where Madison and Ethan were seated, with their parents speaking clearly enough for nearby tables to hear every word. "Excuse me, Miss Riley Harper," Gabriel said, his voice projecting across the ballroom with professional authority. "I need your signature on the final catering adjustments for tonight's reception." Conversation stopped. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. 200 guests turned to watch what was happening at the main table. "I need your immediate approval for the kitchen's request regarding champagne service," Gabriel continued, extending his tablet toward me. "The Dom Perignon substitution you authorized earlier, plus the additional dessert station. That's $8,000 in upgrades that require owner authorization." Madison laughed nervously, clearly confused by Gabriel's mistake. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, gesturing toward herself. "I'm Madison Blackwood. This is my wedding reception. You probably need to speak with whoever manages this venue." Gabriel looked directly at Madison with the kind of professional certainty that comes from years of managing luxury properties. "No, ma'am," he said clearly. "I need Riley Harper's signature. She's the owner of Grandview Estate and all properties operated under Harper Holdings, LLC. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 wedding guests stared in stunned disbelief as Gabriel's words registered. Madison's face went completely white, her mouth opening without any sound emerging. "The Dom Perignon upgrade and dessert station addition brings tonight's total service cost to $8,000 above the contracted amount," Gabriel continued, apparently determined to make his point thoroughly. "Should I process the authorization?" "Miss Harper, I stood slowly. Every eye in the ballroom focused on me with laser intensity. My hands were steady as I reached for Gabriel's tablet, though my heart was pounding so hard I wondered if people could hear it. "Yes, Gabriel," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Please approve all upgrades for tonight's service. And have the valet bring my car around." The white Bentley in the VIP parking area. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Theodore Blackwood's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. In the sudden quiet, I signed the authorization with smooth, practiced movements, then handed the tablet back to Gabriel with professional courtesy. "Please thank the kitchen staff personally for their exceptional work tonight," I added. "They've exceeded every expectation." Madison's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Riley? What is happening right now?" David stood from his table across the room and walked toward me with confident strides. Several guests recognized him now, murmuring among themselves about the famous architect who had been photographed with various celebrities and business leaders. As he reached my side, putting a supportive arm around my waist, Uncle Warren found his voice. "Did he say owner? Did that man just call you the owner of this venue, Gabriel?" Returned to deliver his final revelation with perfect timing. "Miss Harper, your car is ready in the VIP area," he announced. "Also, I wanted to confirm next weekend's event schedule. The pharmaceutical heiress wedding on Saturday, and the tech billionaire's anniversary celebration on Sunday. Both events are confirmed at the requested budget levels." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and confused conversations as guests tried to process what they had just witnessed. Catherine Blackwood was staring at me like I had materialized from another dimension. Aunt Brenda looked like she was solving a complex mathematical equation in her head. Madison was crying now, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as she struggled to understand how her family's biggest mistake had somehow become the owner of the venue she had called the most exclusive location in Connecticut. "But you said you worked in hospitality," she managed to say through her tears. "I do work in hospitality," I replied gently. "I own it." Theodore Blackwood stood up abruptly, his business instincts helping him process the situation faster than the others. "You actually own this entire property, the mansion, the grounds, the business operation. I own 12 luxury venues across the Northeast," I said, addressing the room rather than any individual. "Grandview Estate is my flagship property, but Harper Holdings operates wedding and event venues from the Hamptons to the Berkshires." The conversations around us grew louder as guests shared their shock and tried to reconcile what they had believed about me with the reality they were witnessing. I could hear fragments of discussion about business valuations, property ownership, and the implications of everything they had assumed about my life. Isabella Reed was shaking her head in disbelief. "Riley, how is this possible?" Madison said. "You worked in food service." "I started my career learning the hospitality industry from the ground up," I explained. "I worked for catering companies and studied every aspect of event management before building my own business." What Madison interpreted as limited career prospects was actually strategic preparation for building something significant. Zoe Chang looked like she was recalculating everything she thought she knew about entrepreneurship and family dynamics. "You built a hospitality empire and never told anyone." David squeezed my hand supportively as I prepared to address the question that was really at the heart of everything. "I kept my success private because I wanted my family to love me for who I am, not what I own or how much money I make," I said, looking directly at Madison. I hoped that hiding my achievements would preserve authentic relationships based on genuine affection rather than financial status. Madison was sobbing openly now, her perfect wedding day colliding with the realization that everything she had believed about her sister was completely wrong. "But you let us think you were struggling," she said between tears. "You let us feel sorry for you." "I didn't let you think anything, Madison," I replied, my voice remaining gentle despite the years of accumulated hurt. "You assumed. You all did. And when I tried to correct those assumptions, you decided I was being unrealistic or delusional about my prospects." The weight of 8 years of hidden success was finally lifting from my shoulders, but it was being replaced by something equally heavy. The recognition that my family's love had always been conditional, based on their understanding of who they thought I was rather than who I actually am. As Gabriel confirmed that my car was ready and David offered his supportive presence, I realized that the moment I had been dreading and anticipating for years had finally arrived. The truth was out, but I had no idea what would happen next. Standing in the marble ballroom of my own creation, surrounded by 200 stunned guests who were finally seeing me clearly. For the first time, I took a deep breath and prepared to address the room that had just witnessed my entire world shift on its axis. I suppose a complete explanation is overdue, I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom with surprising steadiness. My name is Riley Harper, and I'm the founder and CEO of Morgan Hospitality Group. We own 12 luxury venues across the Northeast, including Grandview Estate, where you're celebrating tonight. The details came out systematically, each revelation hitting the crowd like aftershocks following an earthquake. $350 million in annual revenue, 450 employees across multiple properties. Forbes' recognition as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in hospitality. Celebrity clients whose weddings had been featured in magazines that several guests had probably read without realizing the connection. Madison, this venue you've been praising all evening, I said, turning to face my sister directly. I designed and built it from scratch 3 years ago. Every architectural detail, every operational system, every staff training protocol. The $280,000 wedding bill you were worried about, I covered it anonymously because despite everything I love you. Madison was sobbing openly now, her perfect makeup streaking down her cheeks as she struggled to process the magnitude of her misconceptions. But you said you worked in hospitality, she managed to whisper. I do work in hospitality, I replied gently. I own the industry. When you assumed I was struggling financially and professionally, I allowed that assumption because I hoped my family would love me for who I am, not for my bank account or business achievements. Uncle Warren was speechless for perhaps the first time in his legal career. Aunt Brenda looked like she was recalculating every conversation we had ever had about success and ambition. Cousin Blake appeared to be questioning everything he thought he understood about family hierarchies and achievement levels. Your speech tonight was particularly painful, Madison, I continued, my voice remaining calm despite the emotional weight of the moment. You called me our family's biggest mistake, a cautionary tale about following unrealistic dreams. This venue exists because I took risks you called foolish and pursued goals you deemed impossible. David stepped closer, putting his arm around me with protective support that was no longer hidden from curious family members. This is David Kim, I announced to the room, my partner of 3 years and the architect who designed this estate. He's also designing our next property in Nantucket, scheduled to open next summer. Theodore Blackwood finally found his voice, his business instincts helping him process what he was hearing. You actually own all this. The entire hospitality operation. Gabriel appeared beside me with perfect timing, delivering his final piece of evidence with professional precision. Miss Harper, your vehicle is ready in the VIP parking area, he announced clearly, also confirming next weekend's events. The pharmaceutical heiress wedding on Saturday, with the $500,000 guy budget, and the tech billionaire's anniversary celebration on Sunday. The room buzzed with shocked conversations as guests tried to reconcile 8 years of assumptions with the reality unfolding before them. I could hear fragments of discussion about property valuations, business operations, and the implications of everything they had believed about my limitations. Catherine Blackwood spoke carefully, her judicial training helping her navigate the unprecedented situation. Riley, how long have you been operating at this level of success? 8 years, I replied. I built this empire while my family worried about my career prospects and suggested I focus on simpler goals. I employed more people than most wedding guests here tonight while being advised to dress appropriately for venues I actually owned. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Madison had spent months bragging about securing the most exclusive venue in Connecticut, never knowing her supposedly unsuccessful sister had created the very space she considered the pinnacle of wedding luxury. I faced my ultimate choice at that moment, standing in my own ballroom surrounded by people who had just discovered that their pity had been misplaced for nearly a decade. I could have used this revelation for revenge, could have humiliated Madison the way she had humiliated me, could have made the Blackwood family feel foolish for their condescending concern about my influence on future grandchildren. Instead, I chose grace. Madison, despite tonight's words, I genuinely hope you find happiness in your marriage, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Marriage should be about accepting someone completely, not trying to reshape them according to your expectations or assumptions. Maybe that's something worth remembering as you build your life with Ethan. I turned to address the room one final time. The venue bill is fully paid, and the staff will handle all cleanup and coordination. Consider it my wedding gift to Madison and Ethan, all $280,000 of it. Maybe someday we can have honest conversations about what family love should look like when it's not based on false assumptions about each other's worth. David and I walked toward the exit together, guests parting respectfully as we passed. The valet had brought my white Bentley to the main entrance, a detail that provided one final punctuation mark to the evening's revelations. As we drove away from Grandview Estate, leaving my family to process the magnitude of their misunderstandings and the generosity they had unknowingly received. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom to be exactly who I was, successful and accomplished. No longer willing to hide my achievements to make other people comfortable with their assumptions. The funny thing about secrets is that keeping them requires incredible energy. Energy that gets released when the truth finally comes out. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't have to pretend to be less than I was. Didn't have to downplay my success or hide my expertise. Tomorrow would bring phone calls and difficult conversations and the complex process of rebuilding family relationships on a foundation of honesty rather than misconceptions. But tonight, driving through the Connecticut countryside in my luxury car beside the man I loved, I felt genuinely free. The woman who had built a hospitality empire while her family worried about her future prospects was finally ready to live authentically, regardless of whether others could accept the truth about who she had become. Have you ever hidden your success to protect relationships that turned out to be based on false assumptions anyway? Share your story in the comments below. What would you have done in my situation when faced with years of family misconceptions, chosen revenge or grace? Let me know your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that family love should be unconditional, based on who you are rather than who others assume you should be.